Okay. Yeah, the stress of our learning should be a panacea. We'll start Daf Mem Aleph. Amar of Chisda, it's 4 lines from the top. Amar of Chisda, Ein Akinin Mispar Sheis Eloi Balakicha Spy Lamai Dasias Kayin. When you get a pair of birds for whatever carbon it is, a yeledes that has to bring 2 birds, or what other things is it? Could be the carbonis that are oil that you have to, that it depends on the person's wealth. So if he's poor, he brings 2 birds. If he's very poor, he brings the meal up. Then the other types of tuma, also there's 2 birds. So how does it get divided? When you have 2 birds, one of them is a chatas and one is an oila. So Rav Chisda tells us that there's 2 locations, 2 times, 2 locations in time, two places where it could get divided, and then it's not allowed to be switched. And that option is at the purchasing. When the owner purchases it, he can decide this one is for my chatas, this one is for my ayla. And when the kayin begins to do the service of these birds, he can also decide. He says this one's the chatas, this one's the ayla. What we mean to say is that anywhere in the middle, it doesn't work. That's what we mean to say. If you could decide in the middle, after you purchased it, this one's my chatas, that doesn't mean anything. Amar Rav Simi Barashi, my time of the Rav Chisda. Rav Simi Barashi says, where does Rav Chisda get this from? What's his source? What's his reasoning? Diksiv, V'lak Chavasa, by a woman that gives birth. It says, V'lak Chashtei Torah Mishnei B'nei Yoyna Echad Leila V'echad L'chatas. She buys 2 birds. One is for an ayla, one's for a chatas. That means at the purchasing, she determines that. And it also says, V'asa ha'kayin echad chatas v'echad ayla. The kayin makes one chatas. That means that the kayin, when he's performing the service, he could also decide. Oy b'lakicha, oy ba'asiya. Those 2 psukim tell me that you only have those 2 options. Notice what we're understanding is that a person that purchases his birds, and he says, Harei elo l'chayvasi, these should be for my obligation, but he doesn't say which one is which. He has to wait for the kayin to do it. Meisvei, the Gemara has a question. How is this coming into us? Because we're learning that there's a goyrel that determines which carbon is going to be a chatas and which one is going to be for azazel. Now, does that compare at all to 2 birds that one is a chatas and one's an oila? So it says like this, Vasel chatas, and you'll make it a chatas. And the Gemara learns, HaGoyrel asel chatas vein Hashem es a chatas. That it's the lottery that makes it into a chatas, but not the kriyas Hashem, not the pronouncement of it. Sheyachal. Now, why do I need a pasuk to tell me this? Because I could have thought differently. Well, I didn't. The logic would be different. Why? If we're in a place where a girl does nothing, but the pronouncement is what causes it to become designated. For example, those cases where there's 2 birds, the girl doesn't do anything. If you make a girl but you don't say anything, it does nothing. It has to be also kiddush Hashem. So makom shekiddush a girl in a dinshi kiddush Hashem. If a girl does work, should not the pronouncement also work? If normally a girl doesn't work, but the pronouncement works. So in a case where a girl does work, for sure the pronouncement should work. So Talmud Chatas. Pasuk says no, pronouncement doesn't work. In other words, the logic could have told me differently. I need the pasuk to tell me that the pronouncement doesn't work. Without the pasuk, what would I have thought? Would have thought that the pronouncement would work. Pronouncement would work. What time is it? When is this being done? It's not when you're buying it, and it's not when the kayin is about to shecht it. It's somewhere in the middle. So what we're learning is that Rav Chisda, there's a problem with Rav Chisda's rule. Rav Chisda tells us that you only have 2 times when you can designate it as a chatas and an oila. But based on a comparison to a girl, if not for the pasuk, I would have said that you can determine it somewhere in the middle. Now, what exactly is the comparison that's creating the question? So you see there's 2 sides to this. The first side is that by 2 birds, the girl doesn't work. So over here where a girl works, for sure the calling it of a name should work. So it could be we're asking from the second part that the calling it of a name, the designation, that should work somewhere in the middle, if not for the pasuk. But according to Rav Chisda, it doesn't work in the middle. Amar Rava Hachikama. Rava says it's not a real question because I can read this brisa with the Kal V'Chaimer, and I can still not interfere with the ruling of Rav Chisda. It goes like this. Ma b'makom shlei kiddush hagirl. The only thing is with Rava, the Kal V'Chaimer gets a little bit longer because the halachas that we're comparing here have to be more specific. Because our problem was that when it wasn't specific, we were assuming that the designation of the chatas and the oila is somewhere in the middle, which doesn't work. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say that the girl is in the middle, but the designation of the chatas and the oila are at either end, either shas lakicha or shas asiyah. So it goes like this: Ma b'makom shel kiddush hagirl v'afilu b'shas lakicha v'afilu b'shas asiyah. Even when you purchase it, and even when you're performing the service, the kayan is performing the service, the girl doesn't work. But nevertheless, kiddush Hashem b'shas lakicha b'shas asiyah. But at those specific times, the designation does work with the pronouncement. In a place where the girl does work, when it's not at those positions, but it's not at the time of purchasing, it's not the time of performing it. But nevertheless, the girl works. And here's the main point: is it not a Kal V'Chaimer that pronouncement should work? B'shas lakicha b'shas asiyah. At the time when pronouncement works. Yeah, so we just avoided the problem by throwing in these details. And the Kal V'Chaimer is not that the pronouncement should work somewhere in the middle where the girl works. The Kal V'Chaimer is that the pronouncement should work at shas lakicha or shas asiyah. Let the pronouncement work. And we have a pasuk, Talmud Laim v'aso chatas, hagirl aso chatas, vein Hashem eiseh chatas, even at those correct locations where it should work, like Rav Chisda says, shas lakicha and shas asiyah. Okay, so we attempted to ask a question. Well, we asked the question and we gave an answer. Toshima, we're asking on Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda's rule that pronouncement of which one is a chatas, which one is an oila, only works at two times. Okay. Toshima, come and listen. Mitami mikdash ani. If someone had entered into the base of mikdash when he's tameh, so he has to bring a carbon. It's a carbon oila v'yared. Depends on oila v'yared means it has a scale, a sliding scale. Depends on his wealth. If he's wealthy, then he brings a chatas behema. If he is poor, he brings the 2 birds. If he's very poor, dali dalas, then he brings a meal offering. So he was just poor. So he was an ani. The hifresh mais lakinai. And he designated money for the pair of birds that he has to bring, a chatas and an oila. It's interesting that when he's poor, he actually brings an oila, which he doesn't do when he's wealthy. When he's wealthy, he brings a chatas behema, and that's it. There is no oila. You follow? There's no oila if he's wealthy. He has to he's poor. It's still cheaper because it's 2 birds versus 1 animal. So, but nevertheless, there's an oila there. Yeah, why exactly? I'm not sure. So the hesher, but then he gets wealthy. Yeah. So v'achakach amar, and then afterwards he says, "Elu lechatasai ve'elu lo'ilasai." I'm not sure why it's lechatasai. I thought it would say elu lechatasi. Whatever the case is, he designates now his money, which money goes for the chatas and which is for the oila. But the problem is that he's not supposed to bring an oila. He's only supposed to bring an animal. This money was designated for the two birds, one chatas and one oila. And now he's becomes wealthy. He has to bring an animal. So he's going to need to increase money to bring the animal. So it goes like this. The money that got designated for the chatas, you can add to that and bring an animal, a chatas behema, which is his requirement. What about the oila? I don't know, but you can't use that because that's been designated for an oila. The problem is that when was it designated for an oila? Not at the times when Rav Chisda says that it works. But his designation of the money wasn't at the time of purchasing, and it wasn't at the time of the kohen performing it. And nevertheless, apparently, it becomes designated. Amar Rav Sheshes, it's a kasha on Rav Chisda. We're seeing that even somewhere in the middle, it becomes designated. Amar Rav Sheshes v'tizbera. Rav Sheshes says, you really think that this is an issue? You have a problem here. Rabbi Elazar says in the name of Rav Hoshia, Mitami mikdash asher behevi carbon ani la yatza. If he's a wealthy person that brings a carbon ani, he's not yatza. Midla yatza echi kava. How does that designation work anyway? When did he designate it? He was already wealthy. And then he says, I'm designating this for my chatas, and this is for my oila. What oila? There is no oila. He's totally not yaitza if he brings a karbanani. There's nothing there. There is no oila there. He's a usher. So how are you telling me that it becomes kava, becomes established, can't use that money anymore? There was no carbon there for him. So how are you going to answer this up? Notice what Rav Sheshes does is he throws in another question. That's how you answer a question. You throw in another question, and then the way we'll resolve that one will somehow resolve the first one. So yeah. So if he doesn't designate it, then he doesn't have to look at them and see and keep them separate. He doesn't have to tie a string around one and say this is going to be a chatas. But if he did designate it, so then it becomes designated, and then there's a problem if it gets switched. Now, if he doesn't designate it, then the kohen will designate it. It's not a problem. Yeah, it would make more sense, more convenient to not to designate it and let the kohen designate it. You don't have to worry about the mix-up, right? It almost sounds like the way you're supposed to do it, and it's important. No, what it's saying is not that it doesn't say. Why would anyone do it? Just call yourself walking with regulation. No, very organized people. They have it all worked out. Look, before a 2-day Yom Tov or a 3-day Yom Tov, you look in the fridge, in the freezer, you say, this I'm going to make for this one. This will be Friday night. This will be whatever. It doesn't. You're right. There's no consequences, but you want to be organized. So you designate it to be. It helps with the organization. So, but then there's a consequence. You can't switch it. How long is the lag between you buy it and you claim? You find it right there. You find it right there. Right.
What happens to the one that wasn't designated?
You mean
He has 2 birds and he designates one. He buys two and designates one.
Yeah,
What
I
happens
think
to the
the
second?
other one becomes automatically designated. Once you designate one, I think it automatically goes. If it was originally said, if he buys it l'chayvasi. Oh no, that's not going to work. I think something happens automatically. If he buys this one's for the chatas and the other one's for my obligation, it would automatically be the ayla. I think that's how it works.
So they do two different kinds of carbonate from this one species.
Yeah, there's one species, Torah Mar B'nai Yaina. One's a chatas, one's an ayla.
Gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So how are we going to answer Rav Shesh's question? We'll say Shekvar Amar Mani Yusai. He wasn't saying after he was wealthy, this is for my chatas, this is for my ayla. But how do we know that? Because there is no ayla. It doesn't work. Rav Shesh's question. So it had to be that the way the Brisa said it, and afterwards he said, that doesn't mean after he became wealthy. That means originally he said, when he was poor, he said that this is for my chatas, this is for my ayla. If that's the way you need to correct it, then then we'll say that at the time when he's separating the money, he says this money is for my chatas, this is for my ayla. Once we're adjusting the time of when this was said, so we'll also say that it wasn't somewhere in the middle. It was when it was very at the origin of when this was happening. He designates the money. He separates it. He says this is for my chatas, this is for my ayla. So just like Rav Chisda told us that at the time of purchasing, the owner can do that. Also at the time of separating the money, the owner can say that this is for my chatas, this is for my ayla. How did we get to this? How did we get that this is the case in the Brisa? Because Rav Sheshes quoted Rabbi Lazar in the name of Rav Hoshia that says that the owner, a wealthy man, cannot bring a karbanani, and if he does, it's nothing. So because of that, we had to adjust the Brisa. Rav Chag Amar Rav Hoshia, we have Rabbi Yoshia. The Rashash switches it to Rav Hoshia, and the significance of that is, besides that, I think Rabbi Yoshia is a Tana, and Rav Hoshia is Namayra. But what would happen here is that Rabbi Lazar and Rav Chaga are now arguing in what Rav Hoshia said. It's Rabbi Lazar and Rav Hoshia and Rav Chaga and Rav Hoshia. It's the same person. Same Amayra. Okay. So Rav Chaga and Rav Hoshia, Damar Yatza. Rav Hoshia says that you're Yaitza. Exactly the opposite of Rav Chaga says name Rav Hoshia. That you're Yaitza. Exactly the opposite of Rabbi Lazar and Rav Hoshia. That he says that you're not Yaitza. Now, what happens now is if we say that you are Yaitza, that means that a wealthy person that brings a karbanani fulfills his obligation. So that means that the wealthy person could have said, this is for my chatas, this is for my ayla. And there actually would have been an ayla there. If that's the case, then he's making a pronouncement somewhere in between the purchasing and the performance of the karban. And nevertheless, something is taking place. It's a kasha and Rav Chisda. Chisda says that you only have two times that you can designate it. Here we're seeing that he can designate it in the middle. The Gemara says, what we're going to do is, we're going to say like this, that the money was designated. But it's still not in the middle. Why? Because he then takes the money and he goes and he purchases. When he's purchasing, he can then designate which one becomes the chatas, which one the money was set aside for his chayva, for his obligation. But then he goes to the store and he buys it. So va'achakach amar is not just va'achakach amar, it's va'achakach lakach va'amar. He then goes and he buys, and when he's buying the birds, he can then designate, just like Rav Chisda says, that when you buy it, you can designate it. Okay, the Gemara says lakach. There's a problem here. Moisif maybe chayvase ma'niu. We said everything is getting messed up now, because originally we were talking about that there was just money here, and if it's money, so he was supposed to buy a bird when he was poor, but now he's going to increase onto that money, and he's going to buy an animal because now he's rich. But according to the way we're amending the brisa, we're saying that he's actually buying a bird. So then what do we mean that you increase money and you buy an animal? What do you increase money onto what? Onto a bird? There's no money there. You already spent the money. So the Gemara says, the paraklei, well, he redeemed it. And you increase money onto what you redeem. How do you redeem it? You sell it. You can't do that. There is a possibility of a pidyon that at certain times, not in certain karbanis, you can be paid. But by a bird, you can never be paid. Oifas, Levina, and Klisharis, in lahem pidyon. That's what Rashi tells us. So now we're stuck. So Amar of Papa gen shalakach predachas. Rav Papa says, really what happened is he only purchased one. This Rav Naftali is going to sort of give us some insight to answer your question before. It says, if he purchased, when he purchased one, what did he purchase? If he purchased an oila, then he still has money left. Why? Because he only has an oila. He has money that was left for his chatas. It's very good. He has to buy a chatas behema. So he increases the money. He had the bird cost probably $5. He needs an animal. It probably costs $100. So he has to add $95. And he has an oila. Okay, he doesn't have to bring that oila because he's going to bring an animal. But what does he do with that oila? That's a bird. Okay, it's a nadava. An oila you're allowed to give as a donation. Ichatas zavan, and this is what the brisa means, that if he would have purchased the chatas at that point, because he purchased chatas oif, right? The bird, you can't go and take the other money and say, I'll increase $95 onto those $5 bird, onto the $5 that was designated for the oila. Because it was designated for the oila, I can't use that anymore. In the chatas the bird that you purchased, that he can't do anything with. Okay, so what we resolved over here is that he is actually purchasing, and that's how he's able to designate. How could he purchase? It says that how could he add money if he's purchasing? He's talking about he's only adding money if what he purchased was the oila. Then he can add money to the money that's left over that he didn't purchase the chatas yet. See, because there's two birds here, we resolved the problem of adding money because we say he only purchased one of them. And it will work if he purchased the oila and he has money left over for the chatas, he can add money. All of this is explaining Rav Chisda in accordance with the brisa that seemed to tell us that he was able to designate it in the middle. Okay. Gufa. Let's go back to that machlokes that we had. So machlokes regarding if a wealthy person brings a karban of an ani. So machlokes Rabbi Lazar and Reb Chaga. Good morning. In the words of Rabbi Ishia. Amar Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Ishia. Metami mikdash asher vehevi karban ani layatza. Metami mikdash asher. If you have a wealthy person that went into the base of Mikdash and he's tamei. Or we could say it otherwise. We could say a person went into the base of Mikdash and he's bringing his karbanos and he's wealthy. I don't know what he was when he went in. But he's bringing the poor man's karban. Rabbi Lazar holds la yatza. Rabbi Chaga amar Rabbi Ishia yatza. Rabbi Chaga says the name of Rabbi Ishia that he is yatza. Here's a question. Meisvei. Mitzayra anishe v'karbanashe yatza. We have a problem because we have the same scenario of the same type of carbon when it comes to a Mitzayra. Mitzayra, if he's wealthy, he brings a animal. And if he's poor, he brings 2 birds. By the Mitzayra, it says that if he brings the ani, when he's wealthy, if he brings the 2 birds and he's wealthy, he's yaitza. I'm sorry, the opposite. Ani shehevi carbon asher is yatza. If he's poor and he brings the wealthy man brings the animal, he's yaitza. But asher shehevi carbon ani la yatza, the opposite. If he's wealthy and he brings the poor man, he's not yaitza. So this is going to be a kasha on Rav Chaga, the name of Rabbi Shia. Rav Chaga name of Rabbi Shia says that Metami Mikdash, it's wealthy, brings the poor, is yaitza. By the Mitzayra, wealthy that brings the poor is not yaitza. The wealthy man that brings the 2 birds is not yaitza. And it's the same carbon, it's the same concept, 2 birds. The Gemara says, Shani Hasam Diksiv Zais. By the Mitzayra, it's more strict. Because it says Zais Teres HaMitzayra. So it has to be accurate. They have to do it right. Yachi, Reisinami. 1 second. You just got yourself into a problem. Because if it has to be accurate, because it says Zais, so why do you say a poor man that gives a wealthy man's carbon, it's going to work? It says Zais, shouldn't work. The Gemara says, well, Harabi Rachmana Tairas. I have an inclusion here. It says the laws of. Well, the laws of is coming to include also that case that even if you don't do it specifically correct, it's still the yaitza. It says Vahatanya, and this Vahatanya is Benichusa. It's a raya. Vahatanya, and this is what was taught in the Brisa. Teiras l'rabes mitzayrani shahi b'karbanasher. Teiras is coming to include a poor ani, a poor mitzayra. A mitzayrani that brings a karbanasher that he's yaitza. Yachal afilu asher shevi karbanani. What about the other way? A wealthy man that brings the poor man's. Talmud leimar zais. It says zais. Okay. Sometimes the Gemara at this point would say, Mara Isa, what did you see that the Tairas should be including the poor man that brings the wealthy man, and the Zais is being Memayet, the wealthy man that brings the poor man? Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the poor man that brings the wealthy man should not be Yaitza, and the wealthy man that brings the poor man should yes be Yaitza. The Gemara doesn't ask that then. I guess it's obvious that if you bring the wealthy man, so included in the wealthy man's is also the poor man. It's larger. But the wealthy man that brings the poor man is cheating out. So that shouldn't work. The Gemara doesn't even go through that, but it seems obvious. The only question the Gemara asks is if it works like this by the Mitzayra. Maybe we should say that the Mitzayra, there's a Binyan Av. The Binyan Av, I should learn from there to everywhere else. Just like by the Mitzayra, it doesn't work if he's wealthy and he brings a poor man's carbon. So v'neilef minei, let us learn from there. The Gemara says, Miyut Rachmana v'im dal hu. It has the word who, if he is poor. That tells me that only by the Mitzayra that's poor, that's the one that has to bring the poor man, and a wealthy man that brings a poor man doesn't work. But by Matame Mikdash, someone that came into the base of Mikdash, comes into the base of Mikdash, and he has to bring a carbon. So over there, Rav Chaga would claim that even if he's wealthy and he brings the poor man's carbon, it's still going to work. I'm not sure if the wealth is. I'm not sure if wealth means if he's able to afford the carbon, or if it means that he has a certain amount of money for his living expenses. Then he goes into the category of wealth. I don't know what it is. Yeah, it's up to you. Yeah. Right. Yeah. He has it in a Swiss account. Okay. We have a new Mishnah. Kasher lashon shel zahiris. He ties a string of zahiris, is this red wool, crimson wool. They sell it. They sell it over there. The band. What is it? Why is red? Why is red for Ayin Hara? So, Baresh Sarah Mishtaleach. They tie it on the goat, on the head of the goat. Oh, you have to go, Ramesh. Okay. Okay, we're going to get to the top of Mem Beis, Mitzvah Shem, Ahmad Beis, just the top line. Okay. So, he ties it onto the head of the goat, Mishtaleach, the one that's the goat that's being sent to Azazel. And he stands the goat next to the place where it's being sent out, like the gate that it's like on its way out. You know, like you're preparing suitcases for your trip, you put it near the door. So you put it near the door that you're going to use, of course. So he puts it near the exit of where the animal is going to go. And he also places the goat that's going to be shechted by the place of the shechita. Now, I just translated this, that it's talking about vehemidai. The Gemara is not so clear about this. The Gemara starts off saying, the Gemara is going to say, possibly, that v'lanishchat keneged be'shchitasa is talking about kosher lashon shel zahiris. He ties the crimson wool on the head of the animal, that's being sent out, in parentheses, and he stands it next to the place where it's being sent, near the exit, end parentheses. Now go back, in the one that's being slaughtered, he ties it next to the place of the shechita, which means he ties it around the neck. There's two ways of reading this Mishnah. You could put a, say, like a hyphen by the Mida Keneged Beis Shilucha, and then go back to the Lenishchat Keneged Beis Shchitasi, and it would be referring to the thread that's being tied. Where's it being tied? Okay. Bala Yetzel Parei Shnia. Reb Naftali, you were correct. Last year, we weren't sure what Parei Shnia meant. Parei Shnia means a second bull, or if it means a second time. He comes to say a second viday. There is no second par. He says a second viday on the first par. Shnia means not parei shnia, but balai eitzel parei shnia. He comes to it to say a second time, and he says like this: He puts his two hands on it and he says viday. He says a confession. This is what he says: Ana Hashem. Right? Please, Hashem. He says Hashem Amafirish. Now, the order of what it says over here in the parentheses probably needs to be corrected. Chatasi avisi pashati, avisi, or it could be avisi pashati chatasi. Yeah, that's how the Mishnayos did it before, right? That's the Mishnah said before. Avisi pashati chatasi. Even though Reb Meir, there was machlekes Reb Meir and the Chachamim, right? And we said chatasi avisi pashati. That's how we have it. But it would be strange for the Mishnah to switch in the middle, to be inconsistent. So, I've sinned before you, Aniu Basi, myself and this is the Kohen Gadol speaking, in my household. That's what he adds in over here. And also all the other Kohanim. Ana Hashem, says Hashem's name again. Atone or cleanse for the sins. He said the different types of sins on purpose, rebellious, and by mistake. As it's written in the Torah of Moshe, your servant, on this day, you will atone to purify you from all your sins in front of Hashem. You'll be purified. And they respond, Baruch Hashem. He said Hashem's name 3 times there. L'fnei Hashem. That's the third one. He says Hashem's name in the pasuk. Okay, the Gemara says now they had a question in the yeshiva. How do you learn the Mishnah? Lanishchat akshirakai. When it says, and for the one that's being slaughtered, is that talking about that you tie the thread on the base of the shechita around the neck? Or it's talking about that you stand the animal at the place where it's going to be shechted, which is somewhere on the north. Well, actually, we know where it is. It's on the north, in between the ulam and mizbeach, right? That's where he's going to shecht it. Said according to Rabbi Shimon, that was acceptable. Okay, Tashema. So come and listen. The Tani Rav Yosef taught kasher lashon shel zahiris b'reish sar mishtaleach be'amidei keneged beishiluchai v'lanishchat keneged beishchita shesh le'yisarav zebazeh le'yisarav ba'achir. So it's not 100% clear so far. You tie the thread around the sar on the head of the sar mishtaleach, the red thread, and you stand it at the place where it's going to be sent out. The animal that's being shechted, the other goat, which looks exactly the same like it, you do something to it at the place of the shechita. It doesn't define. But whatever you're doing, it says shelo yisarev. It shouldn't get mixed up with the other goat, and it shouldn't get mixed up with other goats besides for the pair. So we have 2 concerns here: getting mixed up with the goat that's being sent to Azazel, and getting mixed up with other goats that maybe are somewhere in the base of Mikdash for tomorrow's korbanos. Name tag. Or maybe it's a location. Let's see. If you say that you're tying a thread on it around the neck, then very good. Why? One goat has it tied around the head. The other one has it around the neck. So it's clear which one is which, right? But if you say it's just standing it somewhere, I get it that it's not going to get mixed up with the other one that's standing over there. Well, the other one's not going to get mixed up anyway because it has a thread on it. This one doesn't have a thread. The high katabe, because that one has a thread tied to it and this one doesn't. But it could still get mixed up with other goats. Must be talking about that you're tying it around the neck. And no other goats have a thread tied around the neck. So this is it. This is Shema Mina. We have a raya that the Mishnah is talking about tying the thread around the neck. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. The Gemara concludes with that. I hope. I didn't look in the Mishnayos, but I assume that the Bartanura or whatever would learn the Mishnayos like that. Yeah. Let me see. I have the in here. I have a Rambam. I don't have the Impact Daled. Right? Impact Daled. No. Rambam doesn't mention it. He doesn't mention it. He skips that piece. Okay. Rabbi Yitzchak says, Shtei l'shayne shamati. I heard about 2. A lashon is a piece of wool. There's 2 pieces of wool that I heard about. Achas shel para, achas shel sar mishtaleach. One is for the para aduma. By the para aduma, they also needed a piece of wool. a shani, a red piece of wool. A thread of crimson wool, and it was put into the fire. When they were burning the para, it was thrown into the fire. I'm sorry? No, nothing to confuse it with. No. That was the ingredients to the paraduma. One is for the sar mishtaleach, which we just learned about in our Mishnah, that it also gets a piece of wool. One of them has a certain measurement that you need, and the other one doesn't have a measurement. I don't know which one is which. So I have two animals, two pieces of wool, but one of them needs to be a certain size and one of them doesn't. One of them could be any size. I don't know which one was which. This is Rabbi Yitzchak speaking. Amar Rabbi Yosef nechse anan. Rabbi says, let's take a look at this. You said that you have to split. Well, actually, it doesn't have to do with what we said. It has to do with when you get to the cliff, they would take half of the thread, and put it on the rock next to the cliff, and then they would push it up. So even the one that's over the soil, regardless of how we just learned it, if there's another thread over the other one. But whatever the case is, the sar mishtaleach, the thread has to be split. So if it has to be split, then it needs to be the size to be able to split it. How big is a piece of string, right? So v'shel para the loybay chaluk loybay shir, but the paraduma, it just says you throw a piece of a thread of wool into the fire. It doesn't need a measurement. Which one needs a measurement? The one that needs to be split, which that's the sar mishtaleach, the goat that's sent to Azazel. Maskef la Rami bar Chama. Rami bar Chama asked the question: the paranami by kovid. Yeah, the para needs kovid. That's not a firm way of saying COVID. It needs weight. Why does it need weight? Because it says, sometimes like there's like a little fiber that's floating around. In the classroom, it's the worst. The boys are totally distracted. They blow it and they watch it go over someone else's desk. You can't have a little thread that's not going to fall down. It needs to. The hishlech al toich shreifas. It has to be thrown in. It has to be able to. The weight has to draw it down into the heart of the fire. So, what are you telling me that it doesn't need to have a size? The paraduma, it needs to have a size. It needs to have a weight that it will be pulled down. Amalei Rava says to Rami bar Chama, they were close. Rava and Rami bar Chama. They married the same woman. After Rami bar Chama passed away, Rava married his wife. So they were students of Rav Chisda. The story with Rav Chisda's daughter, where he tells his daughter, which one would you like to marry? Rami bar Chama, Rava, she says both of them. So Rava says, I'll go last because he doesn't want to die. Right? Okay, so Kovid Tanai, Rava says, he responds to him, he says, it's actually a machlekes Tanaim, so it's not a problem. That's an answer. When you say it's a machlekes, that's an answer. If you say, well, it needs to have a weight, not necessarily doesn't need to have a weight. So that would resolve Rabbi Yitzchak's answer. Rabbi Yitzchak tells us that one has a shear, one doesn't. Rabbi Yosef says it's obviously the sar mishdalech that has the shear, not the paraduma. So Rabbi says, yeah, great, because you tell me that the paraduma needs a weight. Well, that not everyone holds that, so the answer is good. Yeah, they also learned by Rabbi Yosef. The para by chaluka. 1 second. The para itself doesn't need to be divided. Eisvei Abai asked the question. How do you do it? The paraduma. Karchan b'shiyari lashon. You have to tie it. You tie the 8 eres, the cedar wood, in the Ezev, the hyssop, with the thread. Now, when it's describing the thread, it says with the remainder of the thread. Remainder sounds like that you divided it. You have some of it that you threw in to the fire, some of it that you're tying up. And so that means you need to divide this also. If you're dividing it, then what are you telling me that it doesn't need a shear? It needs at least a shear to divide it. Ema bezan of lashim. It doesn't mean with the remainder of the thread. It means with the tail of the thread, the end of the thread. It means the end of the thread gets wrapped around this, and then you throw it in. Amar Rav Chanan Amar Rav, Eitz Eretz Nita Las Shekol Tasin Shall Have a Kshera. Rav Chanan says in the name of Rav, the cedar wood and the crimson wool that we're talking about, that gets burnt up in flames, is kosher. That's what you needed. You needed to burn it. Meisvei, the Gemara has a question. Nesavev Lashon, maybe Lashon Acher Mekadesh. If it gets burnt up in flames, you need to bring another one. We're talking about that there's a fire here under the paraduma, and you're supposed to throw in the wool, the crimson wool, together with the eitzeres. You're supposed to throw it into the fire. The flames are, if it flares up and just like burns up before it makes it into the inside. Rav Chanan said, it's fine in the name of Rav. The problem is that we have a brisa that says it's not fine. You have to bring another one. So Amar Abaye Leikasha. Kan bekelachas, kan benechbefes. There's two ways of learning this. Rashi learns kelachas. You had this in Kainas. A fire that's kelachas. That's thank you. A fire that's that's going straight up has a different halacha than a fire that's being bent over, that bends over the wall, regarding a wall that's 4 amos, protecting between the fire and the. So there's a fire that's kelachas, that's burning straight upwards. That doesn't count because that's not teich streifa sapara. That's where the brisa says that the flame is all the way up here. You have to bring another one because the flame is too high. It's not burning in the heart of the fire. But b'nechbefes, if it gets burnt by the fire that's crouching down low, one of those fires that burns down low, so that's al teich streifa sapara. Or like, where's the teich? Where's the inside of the fire? So if it's large flames that are shooting up high, then that's not inside the fire. But if it's a low flame that's like it's very close to the coals and it burns up over there, that's considered teich streifa sapara. So we've answered the question. Depends on the type of flame. Rava Amar Kevet Tanai. Rava says that there's a machlekes here about the weight. And according to this, that could also answer the question why. The Tanya. I'm learning this, that it's an answer to the question. It's not necessarily. It could be that we're going back to a statement of Rava. Actually, no, let's learn it that it's an answer. The Tanya was started in Brisa. Lama karchan. Why do you wrap it around? Why do you wrap the thread around the eitzeres, the wood, the cedar wood, and the hyssop? Divrei Rebbe, so that they should all be in a bundle. It's supposed to be a bundle. That's why you wrap it up. Now, that's what Rebbe says, which means that Rebbe doesn't need it to have weight. Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon says no, it doesn't need to have weight. It needs to have weight. So now we have a machlekes where now understanding Rava's machlekes doesn't need to have weight. But that's also telling me that why, according to one brisa, if the flame is up high, that I'm mixing in a baya now, that if it gets burnt by a flame, it's still acceptable according to one brisa. According to Rav Chanan, it's acceptable, and according to the brisa, it's not acceptable. That has to do with if it needed weight. If it needs weight, then that fits with the brisa. Why does it need weight? Because it needs to be drawn down into the heart of the fire. It doesn't need weight, which is the opinion of Rebbe. It doesn't. It's why do I wrap it up? Because It's supposed to be aguda. It's supposed to be wrapped. It's supposed to be a bundle. So then it doesn't need weight because it doesn't need to. When we say in the heart of the fire, it doesn't really mean the heart of the fire. It means anywhere in the fire. You throw it into the fire, which is good.
It's the again burned up originally.
Right.
It doesn't make it to the heart of the fire. I would say where you do the fire is burning where it happens.
Well,
It's a huge flame is burning 1,000 pounds down. And you take this that hook up to a weight and you throw it in the fire and it gets 1,000 pounds. It doesn't make it to the thing. It's trying to matter if it's this way and this way. You're getting this way. Let's try to.
if you put a weight on it,
Yeah.
it's going to make it to the bottom and it's still burning.
Let's try to. Like,
There's no weight on it, so it's going to get burnt on its way down. Opposite the mountain, opposite the Harabah.
Are.
Right.
And the weight will bring it down so it becomes part of the body, what is being burnt,
Oh,
right? Seems to
has
me
to
that's
be
one
burnt
way
in
to
the
look at it.
fire of the into the el taich sreif asapara, into the burning fire, into the burning cow.
Yeah, but because if it doesn't weigh down, it could get caught and burn up on the way down. The flames
Right.
would burn it, but it
Right.
wouldn't be part of the cow,
Right.
I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Now Avram Nassan is discussing if it really makes it down, if it doesn't get burnt up. He's saying it's a large cow. It's going to need a big fire. There's going to be a big flame. So yeah. So Yitzi is suggesting that we go to Yerushalayim, we go to the mountain opposite, and we try it.
Right.
You see, you have to try it over there because the gravity could be different on the mountain.
Uh,
Okay. Is the gravity different on it? Probably it's negligible how high you are, doesn't it? Right.
But it's the fire in itself. But you have to be part of the animal that's burning. That's why you're doing it. The fire that's been doing it, and it's burning up here, it's still part of it. Fire.
Well, it's straight sapara, the burning of the para, into the inside of the burning of the para.
You said inside of the burning part. The fire is sitting next to the fire. It doesn't matter. The fire counts the mass. It's the part of it.
The map. Yeah. Right here. Okay. I don't know.
There's no
Yasser Ravdimi, Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Ravdimi was a traveler. So he comes and he says over in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, Shalish L'Shayne Shamati. I heard about three pieces of wool. Achas Shel Para, one is the Paraduma. Achas Shel Sar Mishtaleach. One is the Sar Mishtaleach, the thread, the wool that goes over the head of the goat that's sent to Azazel, the Yom Kippur one. Achas Shel Mitzayra. And one is in the atonement process of the Mitzayra. They've used the hyssop and the thread, I think, to sprinkle. So he says like this: Achas mishkal asar zuz. One weighs 10 zuz. Achas mishkal shnei slime. One weighs 2 slime. Now sela is 4 zuz, right? So 2 slime is 8. So there's 10. There's an 8. Achas mishkal shekel, and one weighs a half a sela, which is 2 zuz. And a 2. 10, 8, and 2. Big gap over there. But I don't have any explanation which one's which. I have 3. I don't know which one is which. Kiyasa Ravin, when Ravin came, Ravin was also a traveler. And Ravin came after Ravdimi. So Ravdimi brought this, but he didn't explain it. Ravin comes, Pirsha Mishmei de Rabbi Yonasan. He explains it in the name of Rabbi Yonasan. Shalpara Mishkal Asar zuz. The para needs to be 10 zuz. It's funny too, but it's flavor.
No.
Okay. So it's 10 tenza. Why does it need to be tenzas? Because it has to have a weight. It has to go into the para. Remember, we're on top of Membez. The goat, Mishkal Shnei Slime, it needs to be eight zuz, two slime. Why? Because you have to divide it. It needs to be a little bigger. It has to be, half of it is going to go on the rock next to the cliff. Mishal Mitzayr Mishkal Shekel. And the Mitzayr, that just has to be to sprinkle. That could be the one shekel, which is 2 zuz. Amar Rabbi Yechanan says, Pligi bar Reb Shimon ben Chalafta v'Rabbanan. It's actually machlekes Reb Shimon ben Chalafta v'Rabbanan. Shimon ben Chalafta, I think, had a story. I don't think he is the brother of Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta. I forget where I got that from. Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta. But I'm not sure why. Somewhere in my learning, it appeared that they weren't brothers. Reb Shimon ben Chalafta had a story with getting not a leg. Remember that someone had got a leg of a table from heaven, Reb Shimon ben Daisa, or something. His wife. Yeah, but he got a pearl from heaven, I think. Anyway, it says Machlekes Reb Shimon ben Chalafta and the Rabbanan b'para regarding the cow, the paraduma, the weight of the wool that gets put there. One says 10 and one says 2. They dropped the 8. They went to the extremes. If you want to remember this, whether you give a lot or whether you give a little, we had that in Menachos. That it doesn't matter how much you give as long as your heart is your intention is good. So I forget why we learned this that way. We said the simple way of learning this is even if you give a little, it's fine as long as your intention is good. But we wanted to learn it the other way. We said even if you give a lot, it's still okay if your intention is good. You can give a lot and still have good intention. Lishma. We know the poor man. The poor man is giving everything he has. Of course, he's giving lishma. But what about the rich man? Is he giving lishma? So yeah, as if you could give lishma also. It's also good. So, but why is this a simon? The simon is that the polar extremes, marbe and mamet. So we have that's the way to remember that this is the machlekes. Doesn't tell us who says what. Okay, Amali Rabbi Yirmiyah midifti la Ravina. Rabbi Yirmiyah midifti says to Ravina, leiba parapligi ala b'samar shtalech pligi. Actually, the machlekes was really about the sarim mishtaleach, how much that was supposed to weigh, the thread. V'hahu Yoma, that day that they argued, nach nafshe de Rabbi Bar Kisi. Ravya Bar Kisi passed away, va'anchu basimana, and they made a simon for this. Ravya Bar Kisi mechaper kesar mishtaleach. When a tzaddik passes away, that's an atonement for the people. Misas tzaddikim mechaperes. Right? We learn that from different places. Rashi brings why is Misas Aaron said next to the big day kahuna. They're just like the big day kahuna mechaper, so to the Misas tzaddikim mechaper. We have another source for that. Alter Rebbe quotes us in Tanya. Why is Misas Miriam next to the paraduma? Just like the paraduma is mechaper, so too Misas tzaddikim is mechaper. So on that day that they were arguing about this, they were arguing about the thread that goes over the Sar Mishtaleach. Ravya Bar Kisi passed away. They said, Ravya Bar Kisi atones just like the Sar Mishtaleach. It's interesting, such a major statement about a person we hardly heard of him. Amar Rab Yitzchak, Shtei Shchitas Shamati. You heard about 2 Shchitas. Achas Shel Para, Achas Shel Parai. One is the Paraduma. And one is the par of Yom Kippur, of the Kohen Gadol. Achas ksher b'zar, achas psul b'zar. One of them is acceptable if the non-Kohen does it, the shchita. But I don't know which one. For us reading this, we would assume that the paraduma would be acceptable because we learned so much that everything that day needs to be by the Kohen. It's not so simple though. Itmar was stated. Shchitas para uparai, the shechting of the paraduma and the par of Yom Kippur, Rav and Shmuel, it's actually machlekes Rav and Shmuel. Chadamar para psula parik sheira. One of them said the par, the paraduma is pasul if it's not the kayin, and the parai is kosher if it's not the kayin. Exactly the opposite of the way we would have thought. The chadamar parai psula, one says that the par of Yom Kippur would be pasul if it's not the kayin, and parak sheira, but the paraduma would be kosher without if it's not the kayin. Tistayim, let it be settled. The Rav Damar par psula, and as the Gemara tries to figure out who says what, it's machlekes Rav and Shmuel. Yeah, this is another essay by Reb Ruben Margolius in the book, I think Shem Eilam, where he tries to match up who says what. Whenever there's a machlekes Rav and Shmuel, and it says Chadamar, he tries to figure out who says what. The Rebbe argues with him in one case about Vayamas Melech Mitzrayim. Chadamar Vayakim Melech Chadash HaMitzrayim. Chadamar Chadash Mamish. One says Chesenes Chadash Kuziresev. Rashi says the machlekes Rav and Shmuel. He learned it one way. The Rebbe says it a different way. To Stayim, let it be settled. The Rav the Amar Par Psula. The Rav's the one that says the Par Psula. If it's not a kayin, and the Par of Yom Kippur would be kosher. The Amar Abzera, now we're supposed to add in Amar Rav. Abzera says the name of Rav. Shchitas Para Bizar Psula. See that if the Par is if the Paraduma is shechted by a zar, it's possible. Amar Ravala, and Rav explained. Abzera said the name of Rav. Rabba. Reb Zera was a friend, a student of Rabba. Much younger than he went to. I don't know if he really would have heard from Rab. Maybe not. Maybe I don't know when he went to Eretz Yisrael. Who he learned by. I think he learned by the students of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi, I guess he's saying that Rab said on this Elazar v'chuka sheninaba. When it talks about the paraduma, it says that you bring it to Elazar HaKayin. It's mitzvah b'skan. It was the second in command that was supposed to do the paraduma. So you see, it needs to be a kayin. It can't be a zar. And it also says chukah. Chukah means that if it's a statute, that means that if you don't do it correctly, it's possible. You're getting into trouble over here. When you started to give this explanation of why it needs to be a kayin, and if you don't have a kayin, it's going to be pasul. You tell me because it says Elazar and it says the word chukah. Well, guess what? By Yom Kippur, it also says Aaron, which is a kayin, and it says chukah. So the Gemara says shchita lava vaydi. The shchita is not a service. It's getting into trouble again. The hachi paranami. So then, why are you telling me by the paraduma that the shchita is a service and it needs to be done by Elazar, by a kayin? It's a shani para the kachi bedek habayasi. Well, the para is not really a korban. It's kachi bedek habayas. It's owned by the temple. B'lav kol d'chenu. So then, for sure, it's not a service. It's not even a korban. And you're telling me that it needs to have a kayin, and because it says Elazar, and by the Yom Kippur, you're telling me it's not a service. It doesn't need to be the kayin. You know what it's like? He answers. He says, when the kayin goes to look at the nega, to pronounce the tzaras, to pronounce if it's tar or tameh, is that a service of the temple? No, but it needs to be a kayin. So too also, the paraduma, it's not a service of the temple, but it still needs to be a kayin. If it's in the temple, then I could tell you it's a service, it's not a service, and it doesn't need to be a kain. But once it's outside the temple, then the fact that it needs to have a kain is just like Maris Nagayim, that it's something else, it's a different category. Okay, so we're deciding that Rav is the one that says that the para aduma needs to be shechted by a kain. Shmuel, the Amar Pari Psula, Shmuel says that no, the Yom Kippur par needs to be by a kain, the kain gadol. Ma'ishna Pari Diksivarin v'chuka, Paranami Aksivalasa v'chuka. Now we make an assumption. It must be that Shmuel holds that why does the par of Yom Kippur need to be by the kain? Because it says Aaron and it also says Chayk. It says Chuka. It says that it's a statute, and if you don't do it like that, then it's possible. So, but by the paradum, it also says Elazar, who's the kayin, and it says Chuka. So why is he saying that that's acceptable? Shani Hasim he says that it's slaughtered in front of him. That means that he doesn't do the shechita. It's shechted in front of Elazar. Sheizar shechet v'Elazar raya. That's a good pshat. He doesn't have to do it. Someone else does it. He just has to watch it. But Rav, so what does Rav say? Rav says that it needs to be a Elazar shechting, but it says v'shachar salafanav. It should be shechted in front of him. Rav says that doesn't mean that someone else shechts. That means shleich daitim imena, that you can't take your mind off it. Yeah. Okay. No ADD. He says. Yes, he says. V'shmuel shleich daitim imena. How does Shmuel know that he can't take your mind off it? What do they say? ADHD. What does it stand for? Attention deficit. Hey, donuts. Okay. So where does Shmuel know that he can't be Mesiach Das? Nafkalemi v'saraf v'sapar le'inav. We learn it from, it has to be in front of, it says also, le'inav, in front of his eyes. That means he has to keep his mind on it, by the burning. But Rav, what does Rav say? Rav knows it from Lefanov, not le'inav. Rav knows it from the other pasuk. Rav says, chad b'shchita v'chad b'sreifa. One is by the shchita, and one is by the sreifa. He can't take his mind off it. Utricha. Well, why do you need both of those? Just, I would assume that you need the whole thing. There's no. Because of Rachmana b'shchita, if it would only say Lefanov, you have to have intention while it's being shechted. Because that's the beginning of the service, and your intention at the beginning is most important. Aval sreifa imalai, but the end of it doesn't matter by the burning. So tzricha, it has to say at the end of it as well. Well, because Rachmana b'sreifa, if it would only said at the end by the burning, mishum dahashtu the miskasher para, because this is when it's really becoming the atonement. Aval shchita imalai, but by the shchita, that's just the beginning. I would say that maybe that's not the significant part. You don't need to have intention though. So tzricha, it has to say both. The Gemara now says, "L'muti mai." What are you coming to exclude when you tell me you need to have intention here and you need to have intention there? We are not. Maybe when you gather the ashes and you add the water, you don't need intention. You're saying you need intention by the shlita and by the sreifa. So maybe where don't you need intention? By the putting the water and by the gathering the ashes and putting the water. It says no, that's impossible because the mishmeres may need a ksiv. It says that it needs to be a guarding for the water of purification. It's coming to tell us that when you throwing in the eitz eres, the cedar wood, and the shnei telas, when you're putting that in, the kohen does not need to have his mind on it. He can be distracted at that time. Okay, let's leave the Gemara right here by Yismar.
Good job. More fun tomorrow.
Yeah, have a good day. Good to